this time, we want to share some of the rich history of our congregation. This slideshow was originally created by Johanna Ryan and Deb Harper in 2018 for our congregation's 150th anniversary. We've added a few more slides to it to cover the last 2 years, and we hope you enjoy this review of our history.
So our history started before the Great Chicago Fire in 1868, when a series of meetings were held. A congregation formed a Unitarian church on Chicago's West Side. At the time, Reverend Carlton Staples became our minister, our first minister, and there's a picture of Carlton.
The church quickly grew, and 2 years later, we built our first church at Monroe and Laughlin Streets near Union Park, and the church seated 400 people. Our ancestors dreamed big. Fortunately, our building escaped the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, and we became a haven for Second Unitarian who lost their building to the fire. Many of our members lost their businesses and jobs during that time, but persevered.
In 1873, Reverend Mino Savage became our second minister. There he is. He is remembered, it's noted, for speaking out in support of the origin of species. Religion, he said, as it says, ought to welcome science and not fear it. How prescient.
James Philip Blake was called to serve the congregation in 1883 and remained for 14 years. He was a poet, a composer, and philosopher, and led popular classes on world religions.
So the Reverend Blake called on Illinois Governor Ogilvie to commute the death sentences of the Haymarket riot defendants. There are their images from a newspaper in the time. Then as now, not everyone in the church agreed, but 100 members did sign the petition. Another 16 resigned in protest.
In 1893, we adopted our covenant, which was written by James Philip Blake. It is still used today by us, as you know, and many UU congregations around the country.
While the fire didn't get us in 1871, it did in 1896 when that church burned. Fortunately, the congregation got out, and the membership book, which you just saw an image from, was saved. And although the church did burn to the ground, so we built a new church at Monroe and Kedzie. At the time then, Reverend Blake unfortunately left to serve Evanston Unitarian, now UCE.
In 1911, this congregation called suffragist Rowena Morse Mann to serve our congregation. She was the first white female Unitarian minister to serve a metropolitan church. She was also the first woman to receive her doctorate at the University of Jena in Germany. She went to Germany because the University of Chicago refused to give her a doctorate. So she went to Germany and graduated summa cum laude, and became the first woman also to preach at Harvard Divinity School. She served for a decade during World War I and the pandemic of 1918, and her portrait hangs near the stairs leading into the sanctuary of our building.
So in the 20s, the congregation continued to get smaller and sold the building at Monroe and Kedzie, 3214 West Monroe, and moved to the Austin community and met in a series of spaces, including the Austin Y and Austin Town Hall, until the congregation bought this small church at 5521 West Lake Street in 1928.
In 1932, we called Reverend Edwin H. Wilson to serve as minister, and a year later, he co-wrote the Humanist Manifesto, an influential and controversial call for a new kind of faith, grounded in science and working for the common good.
Dr. Bernard Fantis was a longtime member of TUC, a famous individual in the health community, developed the first blood bank at the Cook County Hospital. In fact, we still have the Fantis Clinic at Cook County Hospital. He's one of two scientists who signed the Humanist Manifesto with Reverend Wilson.
Unfortunately, in 1934, it was deja vu all over again, and our congregation lost another building to fire. The church at 5521 Westlake was destroyed.
So we had deja vu all over again, and TUC built a new church. In this case, in 1936, hiring the architect Paul Schweiker to design a new building. There's an image of the original church with the front doors open where they were at the time.
And this is what the new church looked like in the late 1930s. This is the exterior. And if you want to think about the interior, that is Eric's Zoom background today.
And the wonderful Reverend E.T. Buer, Edward T. Buer, became our minister in 1941 and served 28 years until 1969. There is an image of our order of service on the sign in the front yard, and there's in a familiar room in our church with E.T. Buer himself.
During the post-war baby boom, our congregation continued to grow rapidly as many young families with children joined the church. And so we have pictures of children lining up in front of the church for religious education, and another great group photo of all the Sunday school classes.
So as the slide says, our little church was bursting at the seams. And so TUC launched a fund drive. On the left side of the slide, you see an image from a program supporting the fundraising drive to build the expansion of the church that we know now was designed by James Fife, who had been an associate of Schweiker's, the architect of the original church. At the time was then working with Bertrand Goldberg. And so the church grew and the congregation grew.
At this time, our congregation also bought a small apartment building on Fulton Street for religious education classroom space, and they called it the Junie Uni House.
So around the same time, a member of congregation, Andrine Kaufman, inspired by one of E.T. Buer's sermons, started a series of our wonderful murals in the church, these saints or quote unquote saints of liberalism that adorn the church walls now.
In 1963, our congregation put an ad in the newspaper, and it said, "We welcome people of every race, culture, or creed, for we are all human beings seeking a better way of life together." Not everyone in Austin supported this statement, but our congregation continued to stand up for the rights of African Americans, and civil rights activists and realtors Harry and Ann Gaynor became staunch TUC members and leaders.
So here's some TUC members getting ready for a civil rights march. The church at the time in this period invited the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to come and speak at the church, which he accepted. He was supposed to come and speak to us, but got hit in the head by a brick at the Marquette Park riots. So we didn't get to hear Dr. King, but we did get Roberta Wilson, who had come to the church to hear him, and she decided to stay.
In 1965, the congregation took a stand against the Vietnam War and put that stand into practice, offering draft counseling services.
So here are some TUC members getting ready to get on a bus for an anti-war march in Washington. And during the famous convention in 1968, which there's a new movie on Netflix about, the trial of Chicago 7, our activists, we also hosted activists at TUC who had come to town for the Democratic Convention.
In 1969, E.T. Buer and his wife, Bernice, the longtime leader of backbone of TUC's religious education program, retire.
And we got a new treasure when the Reverend Donald Wheat started to serve as TUC's new minister. There's a picture of Don in the same office that we had the picture earlier you saw of E.T. Buer in.
"10 years later, the congregation faced a challenge. Should we stay or should we go? In the era of white flight, the congregation took a vote and was divided over its future in the Austin community. A very slight majority voted to leave and formed Beacon Unitarian in Oak Park, which later merged with Unity Temple. For a while, Reverend Wheat served both TUC and Beacon.
So during this time also, our RE population declined to the point where we didn't need to use Uni for religious education classes, and so it was rechristened as Harriet Tubman Place to provide a variety of services in the Austin community.
And I'm told these are some of the services that were provided out of that building for a time: a food pantry, a homeless shelter, the Austin People's Action Center. It was home to an alternative school for a while. And as we all know, it was also home to the Pathfinders HIV/AIDS education program led by Bernetta Howell-Barrett.
So the RE program wasn't as large as it was in the 50s or before the Beacon split in the late 70s. But RE at TUC continued and continues. It was still lots of fun, still crazy after all these years.
In 1983, the congregation welcomed mayoral candidate Harold Washington, who spoke at TUC on Martin Luther King Day. He was invited by member Bernetta Howell-Barrett and the minister at the time, Reverend Don Wheat. And Bernetta would later go on to serve in Harold Washington's cabinet.
So in politics, they say you got to dance with the one that brung you. And so Mayor Washington returned to TUC the following year for a forum in the sanctuary.
In 1985, we hosted a Salvadoran refugee family seeking sanctuary.
Church also started during Reverend Wheat's ministry, the Austin Scholarship Program with Reverend Wheat, as well as Roberta Wilson, Betty Harris, and others. This is a picture of some scholarship winners from 1990.
In 1988, TUC member Annette Friedman invites her good friend Ella Jenkins to lead service and RE activities and singing at our congregation.
We've been fortunate to welcome many wonderful voices in the church, particularly for our Labor Day sing-alongs. Here are three of the artists that have come and sung with us over the years: Utah Phillips, Kristen Lems, and more recently, Mark Dvorak.
In 1998, the congregation called Reverend Michelle Bentley to serve as their minister. Reverend Bentley was the first African-American woman Unitarian Universalist minister to serve as a full-time senior minister of a UU congregation, and she served until 2002.
Next up was the Reverend Brian Koval, who came and served us from 2003 to 2014. There is Brian with some of our RE students in the earlier years of the gardens at the church.
In 2014, the congregation welcomed Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom as interim minister for 2 years, and we're delighted to ordain Reverend Jennifer into the ministry.
Then in 2017, some lady named Reverend Colleen Vahey came to be our minister, although, the jury's still out. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but seems to be going pretty well so far.
And many great things continue. So the Little Leaders of Tomorrow Community Daycare continues.
We've been fortunate over the years to also have the endowed Reverend Donald H. Wheat lecture series with a number of luminaries, including Clarence Page and Michael Eric Dyson, come and make some really wonderful addresses to our congregation over the years.
Our TUC community gardens continue, and here's some photos just from yesterday of all the great harvest, which was taken to the Sisters of Notre Dame Food Pantry.
All along the way, members of TUC have continued to cause good trouble and have been out in the forefront and advocating for a variety of positive changes in our community and our society. Here are a few images of the many times that our members have stood up to do the right thing.
In 2019, we adopted the 8th principle with a unanimous vote of the congregation. And 1 year later now, we are starting the first Chicago area Black Lives of UU Haven.
So that's a look back at the first 150 or 152 years, but we're nothing if not a progressive congregation. And so we look forward to progress in the years ahead. Who knows what it will bring?